I've buried 3 men in my time who died within reach of a fire they built themselves. Every one of them was still sitting up when we found him. Every one of those fires was still burning, not a mark on the bodies, no wolf tracks in the snow, no wound, just a man frozen upright 10 feet from the coals he'd struck himself the night before. The first time I saw it, I was 22 years old, and I thought the storm had done it. I remember standing in the gray light of that morning, looking at a man I'd shared coffee with 3 days earlier, and I couldn't understand what I was seeing. His fire was still throwing heat. His axe was leaned against a log within arm's reach. He'd done the work. He'd made the camp, and he was gone. The second time, I knew better. The third time was 2 winters ago, up a draw so narrow the sun barely crawled over the rim. And by then, I understood exactly what had killed him. The blizzard doesn't kill a man who has a fire. The fire does, and it takes a handful of quiet mistakes for it to happen. And I have watched or made almost every one of them over 40-odd winters. I want you to picture it with me. It's the middle of a January night, wind coming down out of the peaks with teeth in it. A man on foot has been walking since morning, maybe with wet boots, maybe with a wet coat, and he has finally reached the trees and dropped his pack and told himself the worst is over. He is going to build a fire. He is going to be warm. He is going to live. That's the moment where most of them started dying. Start with where he set his ring. First fire I ever built alone in country like that, I was maybe 15, and I walked the 20 yards to the creek and pulled up a dozen smooth stones out of the shallows to lay around my coals. They were heavy and pretty and cold in my hands, and they made me feel like I knew what I was doing. About an hour after I got the fire going, one of them cracked like a rifle shot and threw a chip the size of a walnut past my ear. I still carry the scar it left on my ring finger, half an inch to the right, and I'd have lost that eye at 15 years old. A stone that sits in water for years holds water. Every pocket and pore of it is drinking, and you can't see it, and you can't feel it in your hand. Some of them look bone dry on the outside. Doesn't matter. You throw heat at that stone, and the water inside turns to steam, and steam wants out. It splits the rock. Sometimes it launches a piece fast enough to bury it in a pine trunk. I've heard of a man who lost an eye that way, and another who took a chunk in the throat before his partner could figure out what had happened. I've seen dry pine needles catch when scattered coals landed in them after a stone let go. The lesson is old, and it is small. You take your fire ring from high, dry ground, a dry ledge, a rock slide, the hard shoulder of a hill, never from the water, never from a bog, never from anywhere the earth has been drinking. The frontier man who didn't know that started his night by putting his own eye at risk before he'd even boiled water. Then there's the wood he burns. My old teacher, the man who taught me to trap when I was small enough to ride on his shoulders, lost a good wool coat to a single pine ember, draped his coat over a log to keep it out from underfoot while he worked at the fire, and a piece of pitch pine in that fire arced out and burned a hole clean through the shoulder before he could slap it out. He was 3 days on foot from home. He made the walk in the shirt he stood up in, and he got frostbite in his shoulder that troubled him the rest of his life. Every time the weather turned, he'd rub that shoulder and grimace and mutter about pitch pine, and I learned more from him grimacing than most men learn from books. Wood is not just wood. Pitch pine, hemlock, wet cedar, resinous spruce, those woods snap and throw. They pop like small firearms when the resin pockets inside them heat up and burst. Green wood spits and wastes half its heat drying itself out before it burns, and it puts off a smoke that stings your eyes closed. In a cabin stove, resinous wood coats the pipe with a black tar called creosote that eventually catches and takes the whole cabin with it. I've seen a chimney fire once, and I count myself lucky I was awake to catch it. The wood you want is standing dead. Hardwood if the country gives you any. Oak, hickory, birch, maple, ash if you can find it. Split it and look at the grain. If it's dry and it's tight and it isn't heavier than it should be, it will burn steady and quiet and give you real heat you can trust. If it's soft or sappy or damp at the heart, it will fight you all night, and it will burn holes in the only coat you brought. Standing dead means still on the stump, dried by the wind, off the ground where the wet doesn't reach it. Deadfall on the forest floor has been soaking up rain and snow for a season and will not do the same work. That frontier man, if he got the wood wrong, he was standing at his own fire, watching embers arc onto his bedroll and losing gear he could not replace before dawn. Now consider his tinder. My grandfather sewed a small pouch into the inside of every winter shirt he owned. Not a pocket. A pouch, down against his ribs where his own body heat kept it dry. Inside was char cloth, a scrap of birch bark, sometimes a wax-soaked cotton ball or two. He'd check that pouch every morning the way another man checks his watch. He told me a man who kept his fire on his back could lose his back. A man who kept his fire on his body kept his fire. Modern thinking says, pack your gear together so you don't misplace it. That's fine advice when nothing goes wrong. Things go wrong. You break through the ice up to your neck and the pack goes under with you and comes out heavier than a wet sheep, everything inside it soaked. You slip on a scree slope in the dark and the pack goes over the edge without you. You set it down in a whiteout and turn around and can't find it again 10 feet from where you're standing. And the man who packed his tinder in the pack is a man with nothing to spark against an empty night. The old habit is fire on the body, not the back. A tin the size of your palm, dry against your skin, tight enough that a hard fall won't spring the lid. I've fumbled cold matches out of a wet pack with hands I couldn't feel, holding them up to my face to see whether the head was even still on. I've also opened a warm tin against my chest and had fire in under a minute. I know which one I'd rather be. Say our man got the tinder right. Say he got the wood right. Say he picked his stones off high ground. He's still not out of trouble, not by a long stretch, because now he has to decide where he sits and where he lies down. And this is where the smoke starts hunting him. I woke up one November morning in a lean-to I'd built against a low ridge, and my head was splitting and my tongue felt like a piece of harness leather. Took me half an hour to sit up. The world was rocking sideways when I did. The fire was at the open end of the shelter, exactly where I'd built it at dusk, but the wind had shifted at midnight and started pushing the smoke straight back over me while I slept. I crawled out on my hands and knees and threw up in the snow, and when my head cleared enough to think, I understood I'd nearly gone the same way as those men beside their fires. I got lucky. Not everyone does. Wood smoke settles low. Carbon monoxide settles even lower. It has no color and it has no smell and it gives no warning. Men have been found in the morning, laid out like sleeping children. No wound on them, no struggle, just breath that got quieter and quieter until it stopped. In a snug shelter, closer to the fire can mean dead. A cave, a snow trench, a lean-to against a rock face. Any place where the air can pool without moving is a place where the smoke can turn on you in the night. You sleep crosswind of the fire, not downwind. Any shelter with a fire inside needs two openings, one for the smoke going out and one for fresh air coming in. And you watch the flame itself. The flame tells the truth about where the wind is. If it's leaning back over your bed at midnight, it's not just leaning back over your bed. It's laying a slow blanket of poison over your face. Wind is honest. It's the man who assumes it will stay still who ends up in the ground. But say our frontier man got that right too. Say he laid his bed cross to the smoke and the wind held steady. There's still one thing above his head he probably didn't look at. I've seen a fire ring buried under 2 feet of snow in the time it takes to say the word. The man who built that fire got out because he'd been standing when it happened, and he still ended up with a sprained shoulder and a night without heat. The one he'd traveled with the year before hadn't gotten out at all. You build a fire in heavy timber after a snowfall, and you feel like you've cheated the weather. Overhead cover, still air, walls of dark wood all around you. It seems like shelter. It isn't. Every branch above you is holding a load, and some of them are holding a load the size of a barrel, and your fire, small as it is pushing a column of warm air straight up through those branches. Convection thaws the grip a bough has on its snow. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly for maybe an hour, and then the whole pack lets go in a second. Sometimes with a whumping sound you can feel in your chest before you register what you heard. Some call it tree bombing. You can lose your fire, your bedroll, your dry clothes, and the skin off your knuckles in one fall of snow. You can lose your ability to walk out in the morning because 100 pounds of wet snow driven onto a man's shoulders can crack a collarbone or drive his hip into the frozen ground, hard enough to keep him there. Look up before you strike a match. Look up when you set your bedroll down. Look up again before you close your eyes. If there's a bough loaded above you, either you knock it down first with a long stick or you move. There's no third answer. Now let's assume our man has done everything I've said so far. He's on dry stone. His wood is right. His tinder is against his ribs. He's crosswind of the smoke, and he's out from under any loaded branch. He is still in danger. And this is the part that killed the most of them, because from here on, it's not just what he built, but how he built it. Sit down at an open fire on a cold night and pay attention to where the warmth is going. About 90 degrees of it comes forward at you. The other 270 is warming the woods behind the fire. The birds, the empty air, the snow 20 feet off in the timber. Anything but the man who cut the wood and struck the spark. You are heating the outdoors, and the outdoors doesn't need it. The frontier trapper knew better than that. He built a wall, green logs stacked 4 or 5 high behind the fire, laid between between two upright stakes driven into the ground. Sometimes a rock face if the terrain gave him one. Sometimes a hide stretched between two poles. Sometimes a bank of packed snow if that's what he had to work with. Radiant heat travels in straight lines, and when it hits a wall, it bounces back. So a man laid his bedding between the fire and his reflector, and the reflected heat rolled over him from behind while the direct heat came at him from in front. The old trappers called it a long fire, a strip of coals maybe 6 feet along the ground, a low wall behind it, a man tucked in the pocket between them, warm on both sides. I built my first reflector when I was 14. Took me an hour to do it right, cutting green logs that wouldn't burn through and stacking them square. The men on the ridge across the creek had a fire twice the size of mine and no wall behind it. I could see them silhouetted against their flames, getting up to feed the thing every 20 minutes. In the morning, I was rested and warm. They were red-eyed and half-drunk on wood smoke and had already burned through the wood they'd cut for the night. You never build a fire without deciding where the heat is going. Every log you don't reflect is a log you cut for nothing, which brings me to the fire itself, the size of it. And this is where the frontier men died in the largest numbers. Every man I've ever met who was new to hard country built the same fire his first night out. Enormous. A stack of logs 3 feet high, flames licking the branches overhead. It looks like safety. It feels like safety. It kills you. A big fire eats fuel 3 times as fast as a small one. In the middle of the night, when your wood pile has gone from a stack to a scatter, you are the man out in the dark hunting for more with numb hands, tripping over roots and cutting yourself with an axe you can barely feel. That's when the frontier men died, not standing at the flame, out past the reach of it, hunting for a log they should have cut before dark. A big fire cooks one side of you and freezes the other, so you have to keep rolling like a hog on a spit to keep from blistering your face while your back goes numb. It burns so bright you can't see past its edge, and a bear or a stranger can walk to within 20 feet of you before you know they're there. And it lights up the whole valley. My uncle used to say, a fire the whole valley can see is a fire that can't warm one man. Radiant heat drops off with the square of the distance. That's a law of physics, not an opinion. You cannot get close enough to a bonfire to be warm all the way around without cooking the skin off the front of you. You can get close enough to a small, hot banked fire that you sleep alongside it like a second body, close enough to feel it breathing. Small, hot, banked, low, a fire meant for you, not the sky. Somewhere along in there, most of them tried to dry their clothes, and here's where the fire gets sly with a man. I ruined a good Hudson Bay blanket the winter I turned 19. Hung it too close to the fire on a stick, went to sleep pleased with myself and pleased with the smell of the wool warming in the flame, and woke up to a blanket that was warm and dry to the touch and dead inside. The wool had been cooked, the lanolin, the oil that made it shed water, was gone. It never held heat the same way again. I gave it to the dog, and the dog outlived it by a year. Wet clothes near a fire look like drying clothes. They aren't, not if you don't understand what's happening. Water and fabric needs to move out. It doesn't move out if you blast it with heat. It just turns to steam inside the weave. The outside of the shirt gets bone dry and toasty, while the inside layer, the one that touches your skin, is soaked with hot vapor that has nowhere to go. You put that shirt back on. You walk out into the cold. The steam cools against your ribs, and you are wetter than when you took it off. Only now the water is trapped between fabric and skin where you can't reach it. Wool cooks. Leather scorches stiff and cracks when you try to bend it. Cotton just burns. The old way is a hand's width of heat, patient airflow, and turn the garment twice. You dry clothes the way you smoke meat. Slow, even, watching. If you can hold your palm at the fabric long enough to count to 5 without pain, that's about the right distance. Hypothermia in dry clothes is the cruelest death the frontier ever handed a man because he thinks he's safe. He isn't. He walks off into the cold with his death folded neatly against his skin, and then he goes to sleep. And this is where the fire kills him twice. My first winter alone in a cabin, I let a fire go out overnight. Just once. I woke up with the room 40 degrees colder than the day, my breath fogging over the blankets, and my fingers too stiff to strike a match on the first try, or the second, or the 10th. I got a fire back that morning, but I lost skin doing it, and I understood something the old men had been telling me for years, and I hadn't listened to. An unbanked fire is a dead fire in 4 hours, sometimes less if the wood was light or the wind was up. You go to sleep at 10 with a good bed of coals, and you wake at 3 to gray ash and cold iron. If the weather has turned in the meantime, and the weather always turns in the meantime, you are building a fire from nothing, in the dark, with hands that don't work and matches you can't strike. Banking is old, and it is simple. Before you sleep, you mound your coals tight in the center of your ring. You cover them with ash, an even blanket of it, thick enough to slow the air but thin enough to leave heat at the heart. Then you lay one good hardwood log across the top, heavy, slow burning, no pitch. The ash restricts the air, the log feeds slow, the heart of the coal stays alive for 8 hours, sometimes 12. In the morning, you scrape the ash off, add tinder, blow gentle, fire in 90 seconds. The last thing you do before you close your eyes is bank the fire. Not check the pack, not check the tent, bank the fire, because everything else you own is useless if you can't get a flame back at dawn. Frontier men were found at cold ashes with their strikers in their fingers. That's the picture. Not out on the trail, at the ashes, trying. Now come back with me to those 3 men I told you about. The ones we found frozen upright, 10 feet from fires still burning. Because everything I've told you so far, they mostly got right. Their coals were alive. Their reflectors were built. Their wood was hardwood. Their stones didn't split. Their branches didn't drop. They had done the work of a lifetime, and they had done it well. They died anyway. They died because when they walked in half dead out of the wind and the cold, and their hands and feet were the coldest thing on them, every instinct they had said put them to the flame. And they did. And that is the mistake. The one hiding under every mistake I've walked you through tonight. The blood in your fingers and toes has been sitting cold for hours. It's thick and slow, and full of the sour byproducts your muscles have been dumping into it while you walked. When you warm the extremities first, all of that cold blood floods back to your core at once. Your heart is already slowed from the cold, beating half its usual pace. It gets hit with a wave of chilled, thickened blood, and it stops. Doctors call it afterdrop. The old-timers didn't have the word, but they had the rule. Warm the belly and the neck first, not the fingers. A warm stone against the chest, a blanket wrapped around the core, something hot against the small of the back and the base of the skull, where the big blood vessels run close under the skin. You bring the middle of a man back before you bring the ends. I watched a man reach a fire one time. He'd walked 7 miles in weather no man should have walked in, slow on frozen feet, forcing his boots one in front of the other. He sat down at my fire. He sighed. It was the sigh of a man who thought he'd made it. He put both hands to the flames. He fell over inside a minute. I did everything I knew to do, and I could not bring him back. The fire wasn't his miracle. It was his last mistake. And that's the thing I've been driving at this whole time. It's the thing hiding under every one of the mistakes I've walked you through tonight. The wet stone, the pine ember, the tinder in the pack, the smoke in the shelter, the branch overhead, the reflector he didn't build, the fire he built too big, the wool he cooked, the coals he didn't bank, the hands he held out too soon. Every one of those was a decision. Every one came from a habit, and every habit came from doing the thing 100 times when nothing was on the line, or from never doing it at all. Frontier men didn't have some knowledge the rest of us are missing. They practiced. They built fires when they didn't need one. They walked country in weather they didn't have to be out in. They dropped a shelter in the dark on a Tuesday afternoon, just to know what would go wrong when they tried it for real. Their judgment was a muscle they exercised, and by the time they needed it, it was strong. The fire is not what saves you. Your judgment saves you. The fire is only the last decision you make. Get the judgment right, and the fire is a comfort. Get the judgment wrong, and the fire is a headstone. So here's my challenge to you. Sometime this week, build a fire you don't need. In your yard, on your land, wherever you're allowed to. Take your stones from dry ground, split your wood, and look at the grain. Stack yourself a small reflector out of green logs. Bank your coals before you go inside. And in the morning, uncover them, and see if you can pull a flame back out of the ash the way the old men did. Then tell me in the comments which of the mistakes I laid out tonight is the one you'd have made first, if you're being honest. I've made most of them. I'm still here because I made them somewhere I could afford to. Knowledge weighs nothing. It doesn't need charging, and it doesn't go out at 2 in the morning.